Hello guys, welcome back to my channel. In this video we're going to talk about developmental abnormalities, but not just related to midgut rotation, because it will be a very short and relatively useless video. So I'm going to talk about everywhere the first thing as mentioned a developmental anomaly related to the midgut development, that is jejunum, ileum sort of thing. So let's get into it. So we're gonna talk about it in three parts. First, we'll talk about errors of fixation, then the errors in rotation, and then the other ones that are mentioned randomly throughout the first aid, right? So for understanding errors of fiction, I'd like to first talk about fixation of the gut, because that's what I not mentioned in my midgut rotation video, because it's actually what happens after the rotation. So to understand that, I'll show you this diagram. So we have our dorsal and ventral mesentery, right? And we have the midgut, like the whole GIT loop like this. The GIT along it without the rotation hasn't occurred yet. So initially the intestines and duodenum, everything is suspended by a mesentery, right? You can call it mesogastrium, mesentery proper, mesocolon, or whatever. But what happens is rotation occurs. The stomach also rotates and the midgut loop also rotates. That leads to formation of two types of organs, one which still have a mesentery left and one which become retroperitoneal. So how does that happen? In this picture you can see initially the duodenum is suspended by the mesoduodenum. What happens is, due to the rotation, the peritoneum of the posterior abdominal wall fuses with the mesentery like this. There's an adhesion that forms, and eventually the organ becomes retroperitoneal. First aid also has an acronym given, which is called as SAT-PUCKER, which can help you to remember what organs become retroperitoneal. So just go through that. So that is what fixation of gut is. Few things, like for example ascending colon, duodenum, descending colon, rectum, as we discussed, become retroperitoneum. The rest, like transverse mesocolon, pelvic mesocolon, mesentery of the small intestine, exists. So those organs are still suspended by the mesentery. So in the errors of fixation, two things can occur. Either the parts that are normally retroperitoneum can end up having a mesentery, or the parts that normally have a mesentery can be fixed by abnormal adhesions of the peritoneum. So when the former occurs, right, that the mesentery exists, that can affect the mobility of that organ and also cause its twisting. That twisting is actually called as volvulus. The twisting can obviously also lead to obstruction of its blood vessel or blood supply. So we'll come to volvulus again in a bit. So that's about the errors of fixation. Now we go to the errors in rotation. So there can be three things: non-rotation, reverse rotation, or problems with the descent of the caecum, which was the last part of the embryology video that I made. So here we have it. So it's very important that you know the normal embryology to understand this. So non-rotation would look like this. A normally rotated midgut is going to look like this. That is, the small intestine is there, pretty big, opens to the large intestine from the left side. But if the rotation fails to happen, the small intestine will open in the large intestine from the right side. It will be a small bowel and all of those things. That is non-rotation. Reverse rotation is that the superior mesenteric artery will be in front of your transverse colon and behind your duodenum. It is supposed to be the opposite. The duodenum is supposed to be behind the SMA and the transverse mesocolon is supposed to be in front of the SMA. But in reverse rotation, reverse occurs. That is reverse rotation. Third thing is problem with the descent. So the descent cannot happen at all, leading to a sub-hepatic caecum, or it can happen partially, leading to a lumbar caecum, or it can go beyond its normal position and become pelvic, called as pelvic caecum. So that is the abnormality related to the descent of the caecum. So those were related to the errors in rotation. Now I have picture from the first aid book. So it talks about malrotation, what we already discussed. You can see the stomach is there and the small bowel is there. And that small bowel will open in the larger intestine from the right side. So this causes a lot of other things. It leads to other things. Like what are those? Formation of fibrous bands called lad bands. So that's all I know about it. That improper positioning of the ball or abnormal rotation, abnormal development can lead to formation of fibrous lad bands, and it can also lead to volvulus and duodenal obstruction too. So coming to volvulus, it seems to me that it's more of a pathology topic, not an embryology topic, and I have not learned about it yet, so I don't know about it. But one thing that I do want you to take away from this is that midgut volvulus, as we are discussing midgut developmental abnormalities, and midgut volvulus is more common in infants and children, so you can take away that. And that's all for volvulus. Next we come to intestinal atresia. Now this is also a developmental anomaly because the symptoms are seen within first 1-2 days of life. Also bilious vomitings and abdominal distension is seen, and you can see you have duodenal atresia also, which may or may not be midgut, but jejunal ileal atresia is definitely midgut related, right? And this is mostly associated when the mother smokes cigarettes or uses vasoconstrictive drugs during pregnancy. So again, it's a path thing, not an embryo thing, so I think I'll just move on from that. Coming to interception, again I think we'll do it in path, but it's usually idiopathic, but there are some common lead points. Like for example, if children have Meckel's diverticulum, it could lead to interception. Interception is when a proximal part of the loop of the proximal bowel segment enters the distal part, right? Telescoping of the proximal segment into the distal segment. So it can happen due to Meckel's diverticulum also, and Meckel's diverticulum is definitely a developmental anomaly. So that is why I wanted to add this here too. Next we come to congenital umbilical hernia. So if you remember the normal embryology, the midgut loop physiologically herniates during its rotation. That means it comes outside of the abdominal cavity. Eventually it goes inside. But in congenital umbilical hernia, this ring, it's normally supposed to close, but it fails to close. So whenever the baby cries or there is increase in the intra-abdominal pressure, because the ring is open, the loops come out again. So that is causing the congenital umbilical hernia. If it is small enough, it or spontaneously corrects itself, but if it's a large defect, then you obviously have to treat it with surgery. But one thing which is the most important for congenital umbilical hernia is the herniated sac will be covered with skin, right? Skin and muscle, because there's no problem in that part. There's no ventral wall defect, only the ring hasn't closed. So that's why whenever there is herniation, the contents protrude out along with the skin and the muscle. So that's what is congenital umbilical hernia, and it's important to differentiate it from gastroschisis and omphalocele. So I'm going to make a video on that too, probably later on sometime. So yeah, that's congenital umbilical hernia. Coming to the last thing, Meckel's diverticulum. So why are we discussing it in midgut? So the GIT tube is actually connected to the yolk sac with a duct called as vitreointestinal duct. So this normally gets occluded and it's not persistent, but if it persists, it can lead to a diverticular, and there are types. You can either have a urachal cyst, etc., etc. And Meckel's diverticulum in itself is a very important anomaly. So again, I'm going to make a separate video on that, but just mentioning it here so you know it's related to midgut anomaly. So that's all for this video. So we discussed the main, actually the purpose of this video was to discuss the errors in rotation, but I also decided to add the errors of fixation and the other midgut related anomalies mentioned in the first aid too. I hope you found it useful, and I'll see you in the next one. Bye.